websites, and you can join in the conversation on social media sites. Well, more debate is expected today in the Senate on the Andrew Hurwitz judicial nomination and the Farm Bill. Lawmakers will break for party caucus lunches between 12:30 and 2:15 Eastern. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, thank you for your faithful love. You are the one who instructs nations and shapes the destinies of humankind. Help our lawmakers today to grow in grace and in the knowledge of you. Equip them to be servants of the people so that day by day our citizens may more clearly reflect your image. Grant that our senators will shine as lights in this dark world to lead others to you. May they love expectantly, knowing that you will provide serendipities, wonderful surprises of your goodness to help them navigate through life's inevitable challenges. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 12, 2012. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher A. Coons, a senator from the state of Delaware, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Majority Leader.
Ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to executive session.
Without objection.
The Senate is considering the nomination of Andrew Hurwitz of Arizona to be the United States Circuit, be a United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit post-cloture. There's every expectation that time will be yielded back and the confirmation will take place soon. The Senate will recess from 12:30 to 2:15 today to allow for our weekly caucus meetings. Senator Stabenow and Roberts are working on an agreement for amendments to the Farm Bill and will notify senators if an agreement is reached. H.R. 436 at the desk and due for a second reading.
Without objection, the clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
H.R. 436, an act to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to repeal the excise tax on medical devices.
I now would object to this matter. Proceeding any further at this time?
The objection having been heard, bill will be placed on the calendar.
Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Cochran.
President.
The Republican leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Last week, the President said the private sector is doing fine. Well, the fact is the private sector isn't doing fine, and the President's comments made me wonder what private sector he may be talking about. Since he took office, we've had 40 straight months of unemployment over 8%, and more than 23 million Americans are either unemployed, underemployed, or have given up looking for a job altogether. Last month's job report said the economy added only 69,000 jobs, far, far below what forecasters had predicted. That's the Obama economy, and it's not doing fine. And with a debt the size of our GDP, the President's recent push for even more government spending is equally out of touch. Taking more money out of the private sector, out of the hands of businesses and job creators, or borrowing it to pay for yet another stimulus has consequences. We need to reduce the size and scope of government, not expand it. We need to put in place a pro-growth policy to allow the private sector to flourish. That's why Republicans have been calling for years for comprehensive tax reform and for both parties to sit down and begin the process of reforming entitlements. That's how we'll get our fiscal house in order and help the economy grow as well. But without presidential leadership, it simply can't happen. Controlling only one chamber, Republicans in Congress can only do so much. The Republican-led House has passed budgets, while for 3.5 years the Democratic-led Senate has refused to do so. And they've passed 28 job-related bills over in the House that our Democratic friends here in the Senate refuse to take up. For our part, Senate Republicans will continue to pursue a pro-jobs agenda, and I would encourage our Democratic friends to join us before the administration's spending and debt spree forces us into the sort of economic spiral we currently see facing folks over across the Atlantic. And they can start by working with Republicans on our common sense amendments to the Farm Bill. The President may think the private sector is doing fine or that the government isn't big enough, but those in rural America are definitely not doing fine. The biggest threat to farmers in Kentucky and across America are this administration's job-killing regulations. That's why Republicans are calling for votes on common sense amendments that would either eliminate or prevent future job-killing regulations from going into effect, which would provide the necessary relief for American farmers and give a boost to rural America in these challenging economic times. Last year, while visiting Atkinson, Illinois, the President blew off one farmer when he asked about costly regulations. The President said, "Don't always believe what you hear." Well, either the President doesn't know what his administration is doing, or he doesn't want the American people to know it's his policies that are hurting farmers all across the country. It's either one or the other. Here are just a few examples of this administration's policies that are suffocating the American agricultural industry and the Republican amendments we want the Senate to take up. Last fall, the Department of Labor attempted to regulate the relationship, believe it or not, shared between parents and their kids on family farms. The proposed rule would have prohibited those under age 16 from manual labor like stall cleaning, using a shovel, using a battery-operated screwdriver. Many people in my state consider this the type of manual labor that are widely referred to as Saturday morning chores. Senator Thune is offering an amendment that would require the Department of Labor to consult with Congress before implementing such regulations. The EPA wants to lift the ban that prevents Washington, D.C. bureaucrats from regulating non-navigable waters. The expanded federal jurisdiction would bring the EPA and their red tape and taxes into the backyards of millions, literally millions of Americans. The economic impact would be disastrous. Congress passed a navigable ban to protect families, small business, and farmers from Washington bureaucrats trying to seize control of their water or their land. The U.S. Supreme Court twice affirmed the limits of federal authority under the Clean Water Act. But apparently the EPA believes they are above the other two branches of government, and Senators Paul and Barrasso are offering two amendments that would stop the EPA in its tracks. The EPA is considering a regulation that would require farm and ranch families to take as yet undefined measures to lower the amount of dust that occurs naturally. I'm not kidding you. Lower the amount of dust that occurs naturally and is transmitted into the air due to agricultural production activities. I mean, it's hard to go through this and maintain your composure. Things such as combining, haying, moving cattle, tilling a field, or even driving down a gravel road, failure to do so would result in a substantial fine. Senator Johanns is offering an amendment that would prevent the EPA from issuing any new rule that regulates agricultural dust. I kid you not, Mr. President, they want to regulate agricultural dust. Finally, Senator Crapo and Senator Johanns are offering an amendment that would help farmers across the country continue to manage their unique business risk associated with their day-to-day operations. The amendment would prevent unnecessarily diverting capital away from job creation and investing in their businesses in a way that was never intended by the sponsors of the Dodd-Frank Act. Preventing this unnecessary burden would promote economic growth, protect farmers and businesses, and ultimately help save American jobs. In these extremely difficult economic times, rural America is already struggling to get by, and they simply can't be bothered by an overreaching federal government that has literally no idea of the unintended consequences of its policies. These 5 common-sense Republican amendments I have outlined, along with several others, put an end to numerous job-killing regulations, and each of these amendments, Mr. President, deserves a vote. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, today I rise to discuss events in the country of Burma. Every year since 2003, I have come to the floor of the United States Senate to introduce the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act, and every year introduction of this bill has been accompanied by a somber message to the Senate that reform in Burma is nowhere in sight. That's what I said every year going back to 2003. This year, I'm pleased to say, though the bill's language is the same, the message is far different, as is the legal effect of the legislation. In a remarkable turnabout of events over the past 18 months, Burma has made dramatic changes for the better. In response to these developments, the administration recently decided it will ease many of the economic sanctions against Burma through exercise of its waiver authority. And as a result, this year's Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act would effectively renew only a handful of the sanctions against the regime and would preserve the administration's flexibility to use its waiver authority. In 2008, the Burmese junta put in place a new constitution, a very flawed document. It does not ensure civilian control of the military. In fact, the charter may only be amended if over 75% of the parliament vote in favor of such changes, and 1/4 of the seats in parliament are reserved for the military. In November 2010, Burma held an election under this new charter, which was universally derided as being neither free nor fair. The party of Nobel Peace Prize laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, the National League for Democracy, refused to participate due to the unfairness of the electoral process. Restrictions on freedom of speech and assembly were manifest, and there was a prohibition against political prisoners such as Suu Kyi running for office. Not surprisingly, the junta-supported party won over 3/4 of the non-appointed parliamentary seats. The new government took office April 1st, 2011. Shortly after this seemingly unpromising election, some signs of change began to appear. Suu Kyi was freed after years under house arrest. By July 2011, she was permitted to leave Rangoon for the first time since her release. In August, she visited the new capital, Naypyidaw, and met with the new president, Thein Sein. In September 2011, the government lifted its prohibition against major news websites and dropped anti-Western slogans from state publications. That same month, the regime announced that it would suspend action on a controversial dam to be constructed by China in Kachin State. The project was strongly opposed by democracy advocates and ethnic leaders. As part of its reforms, the legislature enacted a bill that permitted Suu Kyi to participate in the April 1st, 2012 by-election and made it possible for her party to re-register after having technically lost its party status for boycotting the November 2010 balloting. In January of 2012, a score of political prisoners was released and a preliminary ceasefire agreement was reached with the Karen, appearing to end one of the longest-running ethnic disputes in the world. In April 2012, Burma held a by-election to replace lawmakers who had assumed cabinet roles. For the first time since 1990, the NLD participated in the election. Of the 45 seats that were open, the NLD contested 44 and won 43. Suu Kyi herself won a seat in what was clearly a dramatic victory for the opposition. This spring, for the first time in a quarter of a century, Suu Kyi was granted a passport and traveled outside Burma. Thus, in a mere 18 months, Suu Kyi has gone from political prisoner to member of parliament. That in and of itself is a remarkable change, and it reflects more broadly the wide-ranging reforms that have occurred in the country. In response to the Burmese government's efforts, on May the 17th, the State Department announced that it would undertake a number of administrative steps to ease sanctions against Burma. These include removing both the investment ban and the financial services ban against Burma, except in transactions involving bad actors. In addition to suspending certain economic sanctions, the administration announced it would exchange full ambassadors with Naypyidaw. Mr. President, I support each of these steps taken by the State Department. What caused the Burmese government to initiate these democratic reforms? It's hard to know for certain. But sanctions seem to have played an important part in bringing the government around. No country likes being viewed as a pariah, and the Burmese regime seems no different. When I visited Burma back in January, the one thing I heard from all the government officials with whom I met, the President, the Foreign Minister, the Speaker of the lower house, they all said, we want the sanctions removed. Suu Kyi herself publicly stated a few months ago that to those who ask whether or not sanctions have been effective, I would say yes, very, very confidently, because this government is always asking for the sanctions to be removed. So sanctions have been effective. If sanctions had not been effective, this would not be such an important issue for them. All of that is from Suu Kyi herself. So, Mr. President, some senators may reasonably ask, why are we moving this sanctions bill again if Burma has made such dramatic positive steps? Well, there are several reasons, and let me lay them out. First, the Burmese government still has not met all the necessary conditions to justify a complete repeal of all existing sanctions. Despite the unmistakable progress made by the Burmese government, now is not the time to end our ability either to encourage further government reform or to revisit sanctions if that became necessary. As Suu Kyi herself has cautioned, the situation in Burma is not irreversible. serious challenges need to be addressed. Violence in Kachin State remains a serious problem. Numerous political prisoners remain behind bars. The Constitution is still completely undemocratic, and the regime's relationship with North Korea, especially when it comes to arms sales with Pyongyang, remains an issue of grave concern. As I noted, reviewing the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act would leave intact the import ban against Burmese goods, thus maintaining leverage the executive branch can utilize to help prompt further reform. Reauthorizing this measure would permit the executive branch, in consultation with Congress, to calibrate sanctions as necessary, thus preserving flexibility. Second, the renewal of this sanctions bill will not affect the administration's current efforts to ease sanctions as announced on May the 17th. Let me repeat that renewing the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act will leave undisturbed the process for suspending sanctions announced 3 weeks ago. In part for this reason, the State Department supports renewal of this measure. In fact, a vote for reauthorization of the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act should be seen as a vote in support of the administration's easing of sanctions and a vote to support reform efforts in Burma. Now, as a practical matter, renewal of the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act would entail, number one, extending for another year the ban against Burmese imports. Number two, continuing authority for financial services sanctions, but leaving in place the authority the administration needs to proceed with the easing of such restrictions. And three, leaving untouched the administration's ability to ease the investment ban, which is part of a separate bill. Finally, renewal of the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act has continued bipartisan support in Congress and the support of Suu Kyi and the Democratic opposition in Burma. There are unfortunately too few issues where the administration has sought to work with Congress in a bipartisan manner. Mighty few, in fact. But on the issue of sanctions reauthorization, the State Department and I are in full agreement. I also know that my longstanding partner on Burma on the other side of the aisle, Senator Feinstein, shares my sentiments about reauthorizing this measure. As for Burma's Democratic opposition, I spoke with Suu Kyi just a few days ago. She told me she believes the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act should be renewed. Now, if Burma stays on the path that it seems to be on to reform, it will require significant help in reforming its economy and in developing business practices that encourage enduring foreign direct investment and corporate responsibility. A great deal of work must be done as Burma looks ahead to hosting the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in 2014. For the first time in half a century, Burma seems to be on the right path to reform, and reauthorization of the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act places the United States squarely on the side of reform and of reformers. For the reasons I've laid out, I believe a renewal of this measure is the right step to take. Burma has made great strides over the past 18 months, and Congress should recognize those strides. At the same time, Congress should not be fully satisfied with recent reforms, as much more work remains to be done. Now, Mr. President, in closing, I'm introducing the renewal of the Freedom and Democracy Act, originally passed in 2003, for myself, Senator Feinstein, with whom I've worked on this over the years and referred to in my remarks, Senator John McCain, who's been very active in this area, met with Suu Kyi this past year, Senator Durbin, and Senator Collins, who had the opportunity to meet with Suu Kyi just the week before last, all of whom are active and interested in this issue, and I ask that this resolution appear in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
before my friend leaves the floor, I express my appreciation really from our country for his tireless efforts in focusing attention on what's been going on in Burma. He's come to the floor and given numerous statements to focus attention on this. And it took a while to get some traction, but finally he got some traction, and that's why progress was made in Burma. I appreciate his mentioning Senator Feinstein. She's also been very focused on this, but no one's been to the floor more than Senator McConnell talking about this issue. And as a result of that, we've made progress. It's been slow, but it's been deliberate, and I think we can see a new day for that country.
Nevada.
Mr. President, I'll take my time now and talk about a number of things. So the first thing I just want to mention, my friend, the Republican leader, talked about the fact that the President has done enough to create jobs. Mr. President, we've all heard that long-standing joke. In fact, I wasn't a joke. I represented a young man who murdered his parents. And the joke all during that period of time is, and I guess now your defense is going to be he's going to claim he's an orphan. And nothing novel or new or unique in the experience I had representing that young man who had killed his parents. But the Republican leader's remarks reminds me of that. He is saying that the problem with this country is Obama. That's like the fact that someone kills their parents and then claims they're an orphan. Republicans have blocked bill after bill after bill. These pieces of legislation have been suggested by, introduced by friends of Senator Obama, Congress, oh boy, President Obama. These were all job-creating bills. And simply, Mr. President, every one of these, with rare exception, have been stopped on procedural basis by the Republicans. Then the Republican leader cites non-relevant Republican amendments that they would like to offer on the Farm Bill as ways to create jobs. But it's precisely these non-relevant, non-germane amendments keep the Senate from doing its work. It's job-creating work, like the Farm Bill. Farm Bill has 16 million people, Mr. President, that work doing farm programs. We haven't done one in 5 years. The highway bill is something we're waiting for the Republicans in the House to move with us on that. So I would just simply say we live in a world that is imperfect. We live in a country that's imperfect. But let's give credit where credit is due. President Obama and this administration found themselves in a terribly deep hole when he was elected 3.5 years ago. That administration that he replaced lost more than 8 million jobs, about a million jobs a year in the prior administration. And President Obama has had 27 straight months of private job creation. So I think we deserve, and he deserves, some credit for the work that he's done in that regard. So I really strongly object to my Republican leader's remarks. It's just simply wrong. And if we had some cooperation from my friends on the other side of the aisle, as we say, we would have a lot more jobs created in this country. But my friend has said that his #1 issue is defeat President Obama, and that's what's happened here. We simply haven't been able to legislate appropriately because of that's their mantra. Mr. President, technology has changed our world, and that is an understatement. Excuse me. It's changed the way we shop, the way we bank, even the way we travel. It changes the way we get information, and that's an understatement. And the way we share it, and that's an understatement. Mr. President, it was about 10 years ago or so I decided to sell my home here in the suburbs, and I was stunned by one of my boys telling me, "Hey, Dad, you want to find out what other homes have been selling for around that area? Give me about a minute." And they pulled up on the computer every home in that area that had been sold in the last 2 years. When, how much. and even more detailed than that. How could you do that? Well, Mr. President, that was 10 years ago. That was in the dark ages with technology. There's so many things that can be done now. Someone can go online, go to Amazon. You can buy virtually anything in the world on that one website. I met with someone a couple weeks ago that had gone to work with Google when they had 15 employees. And he talked to us about the tremendous problems they had starting this company. They wanted to give people information. And I'm not going to go into all the detail, but it was very difficult to come up with the Google that now exists. It wasn't there when there were 15 employees. They were working all night long trying to shut down some computers and keep others going. And so it's amazing what we have on the computer. You know, everyone can do it. Who wrote that song? What's the name of that play? What's the capital of Uzbekistan? Go to your BlackBerry, go to your whatever you have. Get it in a second. So, Mr. President, the way we get information, the way we share it has changed so dramatically. It's changed the way our country protects itself. Now, that isn't something that people understand as well as Google and Amazon. But the way we protect our country has changed. And it's changed the type of attacks we must guard against. Some of the top national security officials, including General Martin Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General David Petraeus, four-star general, now head of the CIA, one of America's great patriots, and Leon Panetta, Secretary of Defense. They've all said that malicious cyber attacks are the most urgent threat to our country. Not North Korea, not Iran, not Pakistan, not Afghanistan, but cyber attacks. We've already seen some of these. They've been kind of quiet to some, but not those in the security field. We've seen cyber attacks on our nuclear infrastructure, our Defense Department's most advanced weapons, and the stock exchange, NASDAQ, had an attack. And most major corporations have been attacked. They spend huge amounts of money just protecting their product or their operations from not collapsing because of cyber attacks. Cyber attacks don't threaten only our national security, they threaten our economic security. These attacks cost our economy billions of dollars every year, millions of dollars every hour, and thousands of jobs. So we need to act quickly to pass legislation to make our nation safer and protect American jobs. The Defense Department, Department of Homeland Security, and experts from across the intelligence community have issued chilling warnings about the seriousness of this threat. Mr. President, I can't stress enough how concerned people who understand security feel about this. Just a few days ago, Senator McConnell and I received a letter from a remarkable bipartisan group of former national security officials, Democrats and Republicans. The group includes 6 former Bush and Obama administration officials, Michael Chertoff, who had been a circuit court judge, very judicial scholar, became head of the Department of Homeland Security during some very difficult times we had as a country. Paul Wolfowitz, who's been advising presidents for decades. Admiral Mike McConnell, General Michael Hayden, General James Cartwright, William Lynn III. That's who signed the letter. And I could give a short dissertation on every one of these individuals about what they know about security of our country. The letter presented a danger in stark terms, as stark as I could ever imagine. This is a public letter, Mr. President. Listen to what this one paragraph says. Quote, "We carry the burden of knowing that 9/11 might have been averted with intelligence that existed at the time." Listen to that, Mr. President. They are admitting that 9/11 could have been averted with the tools we had at hand. They go on to say, We do not want to be in the same position again when cyber 9/11 hits. It is not a question of whether this will happen. It is a question of when. End of quote. Mr. President, this isn't my saying this. This is General Hayden, who, when he was with head of the CIA, briefing many times about some of the most sensitive things going on during the height of the Iraq War. Marine General James Cartwright, Defense Department expert William Lynn III. This imminent group called the threat of a cyber attack imminent. What does imminent mean? It means now. And they said it, quote, represents the most serious challenge to our national security since the onset of the nuclear age 60 years ago. Let me reread that, Mr. President. They said it represents the most serious challenge to our national security since the onset of the nuclear age 60 years ago. They said it. I didn't. The letter noted that the top cybersecurity priority is safeguarding critical infrastructure. Computer networks, talked about those a little bit already, but computer networks that control our electrical grid, our water supplies, our sewers, our nuclear plants, energy pipelines, communication systems, and financial systems, and more. Every one of these, we had because of Senator Mikulski, she was the one that said it was important we do this. We're down in this classified room. We had a briefing on an example of what would happen in New York City if they took down the computer system to run that state's electricity. It would be disastrous, not only for New York, but for our country. These vital networks must be required to meet minimum cybersecurity standards. That's what these prominent Americans believe, and so do I. The letter was clear that securing this infrastructure was part of any cybersecurity legislation this Congress considers. I believe that also. General Keith Alexander, Director of the National Security Agency, has said something very similar. This is what he wrote to Senator McCain recently, and I quote, "Critical infrastructure protection needs to be addressed in any cybersecurity legislation. The risk is simply too great considering the reality of our interconnected and interdependent world." End of quote. General Alexander is one voice among many, many. The President of the United States, President Obama, the Nonpartisan Center for Strategic and International Studies Commission on Cybersecurity, the two chairmen of the 9/11 Commission, Governor Kane, Congressman Hamilton, the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, the Director of the FBI, Robert Mueller. They've all echoed a call to action, not sometime in the distant future, now. They believe the attack is imminent. Now, Mr. President, the attack may not be one that knocks down buildings and starts fires that we saw in 9/11, but it'll be a different kind of attack that's even more destructive. The entire national security establishment, including leading officials of the Bush and Obama administrations, civilian and military leaders, Republicans and Democrats, agree on the urgent need to protect this vital infrastructure. That's only part of it, Mr. President. And yet some key Republicans continue to argue that we should do nothing to secure critical infrastructure, that we should just focus on the military, when virtually every intelligence expert says we need to secure the systems that make the lights come on, inaction is not an option. A coalition of Democrats and Republicans, including the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Lieberman, and the ranking member, Senator Collins, the chairman of the Commerce Committee, Senator Rockefeller. But remember, Senator Rockefeller was for years chairman of the Intelligence Committee and or the ranking member of that. Senator Feinstein, now the chair of the Intelligence Committee. They have joined together and proposed one approach to address this problem. It's legislation. It's not something that's theoretical. It's not a issue paper. It's legislation. Their bill is an excellent piece of legislation and has been endorsed by many members of the national security community. It's a good approach, and it would make our nation safer. But there are other possible solutions to this urgent challenge. Unfortunately, the critics of the bill have failed to offer any alternative to securing our nation's critical infrastructure. The longer we argue over how to tackle these problems, the longer our power plants, financial systems, and water infrastructure go unprotected. Everyone knows this Congress can't pass laws that don't have broad bipartisan support. There's 53 of us, 47 of them. So we'll need to work together on a bill that addresses the concerns of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. But for that to happen, more of my Republican colleagues need to start taking this threat seriously. It's time for them to participate productively in the conversation instead of just criticizing the current approach. There's room for more good ideas on the table, and I welcome to the discussion any Republican genuinely interested in being part of the solution. But national security experts agree. We can't afford to waste any more time. The question is not whether to act, but how quickly we can act. And, Mr. President, I put everyone on notice. We are going to move to this bill at the earliest possible date. I would ask business for the day.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the following hour will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
President.
The Senator from Colorado.
President, before I talk about production tax credit, which brought me to the floor, I want to associate myself with the leader's remarks. I had the great privilege to sit on the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and the leader has put his finger on what should be a singular focus on the part of the Senate. We've been warned about the threats in the cyber domain. It's time to act. There are plans that are concrete, focused, and have great support. We should act as soon as we possibly can. I want to thank the leader for bringing that to our attention. Mr. President, I rise today to talk about a very important issue for the economies of both my state and the entire nation, and that's the future of the wind power industry in the United States. And a future that is at risk, I might add, if Congress doesn't extend the production tax credit for wind. Such inaction jeopardizes U.S. jobs and threatens what's a real bright spot for American manufacturing. Such inaction is not acceptable to the people of my home state of Colorado, nor, I believe, to Americans more broadly. And many of us know, I think all of my colleagues know, that we've seen the wind industry grow by leaps and bounds over the last few years. According to the Wind Energy Industry Association, the industry has attracted an average of over $15 billion annually from 2001 to 2011 in private investment in our wind sector here in the United States. In 2009, that figure was $20 billion when 10,000 megawatts, the highest annual total to date of wind, were installed. 75,000 hardworking Americans find good-paying jobs in the wind sector, and there are 6,000 of those jobs in Colorado. So, Mr. President, I'm not unbiased on this, but when you look around the country, nobody should be unbiased. Those jobs also have a positive ripple effect in all of these communities where they're based. And just over the last 4 years, wind represented 35% of all new power capacity in our country, second only to natural gas. And with technological advances, wind turbines are now generating 30% more electricity per turbine, which means you're producing more energy while driving down costs. And this also means that all Americans, from the Great Plains to the Eastern Shores, have access to more affordable, reliable, and secure clean energy. That's a win-win. And it's little wonder that our constituents are demanding that we extend the wind production tax credit. And I want to just say that this industry and the good news that's coming out of it couldn't have come at a better time for our manufacturing base, which has really seen relentlessly tough times over the last few years. The wind industry is cutting against the grain, and it's creating manufacturing jobs at a time when many companies are outsourcing jobs. And this chart here gives you a great picture of what's been happening all over the country. You can see in every sector of the country we have wind manufacturing jobs. At the end of last year, the wind industry included almost 500 manufacturing facilities that employ 30,000 people spanning 43 states. And we have wind projects in a vast majority of states, 38 out of 50. And last year alone, over 100 different wind projects were installed, ranging from a single turbine to over 4,000 megawatt capacity plants. Back in 2005, that's just 7 years ago, Mr. President, we had only 5 wind turbine manufacturers. But with steady and consistent growth and government policy support and certainty, the number of domestic and international manufacturers here in our country grew to 23 at the end of 2011. And, Mr. President, that's a key factor, the certainty that's been provided that will help this industry continue to grow jobs. And at a time when our economy is still coming back after the 2008 recession, and we're facing stiff competition from other countries, the wind industry is a dynamic example for how we can grow manufacturing jobs and investment in our country. Now, when I started out, Mr. President, I mentioned the wind production tax credits, known as the PTC. It's been a key factor in this growth. It's been central to this young industry, and it's still a very young industry, its success here in America by helping make wind energy, it's still being commercialized, more economical. However, this critical tax credit expires at the end of this year. And unless we act now in this Congress to extend the wind production tax credit, we risk losing this industry as well as the jobs, investment, and the manufacturing base that it creates to our competitors in China, in Europe, and other countries. And that's the last thing we need and our economy needs. So I've come to the floor to urge Congress to keep our country an open marketplace for innovative energy industries and for new investments. The United States is on the cutting edge of renewable energy technologies and on a path to further secure energy independence. And we have to maintain that momentum by passing an extension of the wind production tax credit. And, Mr. President, in fact, it's so important, this extension, that I'm planning to come to the Senate floor every morning until we get our act together and extend the PTC, not just for Colorado, but for every state across our country. And I plan to talk about the importance of wind energy in a different state every time I come to the floor. I look forward to talking about your great state, the first state of Delaware. And I hear every day from Coloradans who are astonished, they're incredulous that we haven't acted to extend what's a common sense tax credit. We need to be reminded that American jobs are at stake if we fail to act. Simply put, if we don't extend the PTC as soon as possible, the wind industry will shrink significantly in 2013. Estimates are that we could lose almost half of the wind-supported jobs, down from 78,000 in 2012 to 41,000 in 2013. And if we fail to extend the tax credit, total wind investment is projected to drop by nearly two-thirds, from $15.5 billion in 2012 to $5.5 billion in 2013. That's simply unacceptable. Now, Mr. President, luckily, I'm not alone in this effort. There's a strong bipartisan support in the Senate, in this chamber, for the extension of the tax credit. And, Mr. President, yes, this is one of those occasions where we're talking about legislation supported by members of both parties. Senators Grassley, the Republican senator from Iowa, along with myself and 7 other Democrats and Republicans, introduced a bill earlier this year to extend the tax credit. And Senator Jerry Moran, the Republican senator from Kansas, and I led 12 members from across the country and both sides of the aisle in urging our Senate leadership to work with us to extend the PTC as soon as possible. Yet we haven't seen that happen, Mr. President. Instead of addressing what's a bipartisan proposal that's been a proven job creator, Congress has been caught up in partisan fights. Let's do what Americans are demanding that we do. Let's work together to create jobs and strengthen our economy as well as our energy security. Let's pass the PTC as soon as possible, ASAP. So I'll be back tomorrow. I'm going to talk about specifically the importance of the PTC to my home state of Colorado. We are home to thousands of renewable energy jobs, including high-paying manufacturing ones, but that would change literally overnight if the PTC is not extended. Mr. President, for the good of our economy, I ask you and all of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle, work with me, let's work together to get the PTC extended. Mr. President, thank you. I yield the floor.
The Senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss an amendment that I'm proposing to the 2012 Farm Bill that we're debating now in the Senate. Before I speak to that, I would also like to associate myself with the leader's comments about the importance of taking care of our cyber defense, putting ourselves in a position to be able to deflect and deter cyber attacks, terrorist or otherwise, against our industries and against our federal government. As chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Cyber Command is part of our responsibility, and the leader is exactly on target with his comments about the need to move forward to protect our country against future cyber attacks, which we encounter daily, recognizing that we perhaps do know what we know, but we're in that unfortunate position of not knowing what we don't know. And to modernize and to move forward is absolutely essential to maintain vigilance against cyber attacks in the future. Now, the amendment that I'd like to talk about today and like to propose is about fairness. It's about fairness for America's farmers and ranchers and fairness to all taxpayers. First, I'd note that one of the key elements of the 2012 Farm Bill that we drafted in the Senate and is now on the floor is about reform. In particular, the bill reforms a program of federal subsidies that have gone to farmers regardless of whether farm prices are high or low. These subsidies are known as direct farm payments. They were established by the 1996 Farm Bill as a way to transition producers away from the government-controlled system of agriculture to more market-based agriculture. These direct farm payments, which are outdated government subsidies, were supposed to be temporary. And the 2012 Farm Bill takes the necessary step to eliminate them and remove them from the future. When this change is enacted, farmers won't be paid for crops they aren't growing on land they aren't planting. Eliminating direct payments will save $15 billion over 10 years, which will be used for deficit reduction. Producers in my state understand that given our nation's fiscal problems, we have to have shared sacrifice to get the debt and deficit under control. And as we end these outdated subsidies, the Farm Bill establishes that crop insurance will be the focal point of risk management by strengthening crop insurance and expanding access so farmers are not wiped out by a few days of weather or bad prices. Crop insurance is a shared private-public partnership that maintains the safety net that we all need to sustain American agriculture. In my efforts to identify other areas where shared sacrifice for deficit reduction can be pursued, I am now proposing an amendment to eliminate another set of government subsidies which are unnecessary and should be eliminated. These subsidies go to just 2% of the nation's livestock producers. They receive substantial taxpayer-paid subsidies for grazing on public lands. In the interest of fairness to all livestock producers and the taxpayers, we need to reform federal grazing subsidies. My amendment would require that ranchers pay grazing fees based more closely on the market value for their region when grazing on public lands. Today, the 2% of livestock producers grazing on public lands pay far below market value that other producers are paying. Given our huge federal debt and deficit, we can no longer afford to heavily subsidize an elite group of ranchers to graze their cattle on public lands at the taxpayers' expense. These ranchers receive a special deal, federal welfare, so to speak, that they don't need, and most ranchers can't get, and taxpayers shouldn't be paying for. It's a matter of fairness to level this playing field, and it will help balance the budget as well. This 2% of the country's ranchers have grazing rights on public lands that cost the government, by lost income, $144 million a year to manage. The government collects only about $21 million a year in grazing fees from ranchers, according to a 2005 study by the Government Accountability Office. That leaves a net cost to taxpayers of more than $120 million a year. Losing $120 million of tax money per year isn't fair to taxpayers, nor is it fair to producers who then are required to subsidize their competition. This report also found that two agencies that manage most of the federal grazing lands, the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service, actually reduced grazing fees during years when grazing fees on private lands increased. Get that. Federal government reducing fees on public lands when fees are being raised on private lands. The GAO found that from 1980 to 2004, BLM's and Forest Service's fees fell by 40%. At the same time, grazing fees charged by private ranchers rose 78%. By an actuary's terms, that's disintermediation. One's going in one direction, the other is going another direction. Furthermore, the GAO found that if the goals of the grazing fee were to recover expenditures, BLM and Forest Service would charge $7.64 and $12.26 per annual unit month. That's much higher, get this, much higher than the current $1.35 per animal unit that ranchers pay to graze on public lands. That's not fair. The GAO stated that the formula used to calculate the fee includes ranchers' ability to pay and is not, quote, primarily to recover the agency's expenditures or to capture the fair market value of forage, unquote. No kidding. That's what they said. That's what they think this program's all about. In Nebraska, it costs livestock producers who get this special deal about $1.35 per cow to graze on public land. But it costs other producers who don't graze on public land an average of $30 per cow to graze on private land just in northwest Nebraska. And it costs an average of $38 per cow on private land just across all of northern Nebraska. That's according to the University of Nebraska's Agriculture Economics Department. I'd note that I'm aware that others before me have tried to reform federal grazing fees, and they're saying to me right now, good luck. But given today's critical need to get our nation's fiscal house in order, it's time to bring grazing costs on public lands more in line with what it costs producers to graze on private lands. There is no fairness in this disparity. I urge my colleagues to join me in working to improve the 2012 Farm Bill reforms by ending this unfair and outdated federal grazing subsidy. Doing so would bring fairness to all livestock producers and have the added benefit of saving taxpayers more than $2 billion over the next decade of savings that could help pay down the national debt and reduce our deficit in the meantime. With that, Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity and I yield the floor.
The Senator from Michigan.
First, Mr. President, I have 4 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, in a short while, I think afternoon, we will be